Good morning, everyone. We're going to give it just another minute since folks are still dropping in, so everyone can just stand by. We'll begin here very shortly.
All right, looks like the attendees are kind of slowing down, Eric. I think we're good to get started.
Okay, thanks, Shale. All right, well, good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Bergman. I'm the Division Director here at the Division of Local Government at DOLA. We are coming to you live from our world headquarters at 1313 Sherman Street in Denver. And welcome to our Local Government Resources Call. This monthly call supports local governments and partner organizations in navigating historic state and federal funding opportunities and provides other resources that can help strengthen communities. Believe it or not, this is the 99th call and our final one for 2024. We're going to take a break in December for the holidays. In honor of our 99th call, I've been asked to do an a cappella rendition of 99 Luftballons by Nena. Hold on, I'm now getting word we are not doing a rendition of 99 Luftballons. My apologies. We will start the call back up in January with new topics and programs that support local governments beyond funding navigation, and we will be moving to an every other month schedule, still on the third Wednesday of the month at 11 a.m. We will announce new topics soon. But first, let's get on to our DOLA updates from our State Demography Office. Thank you to all who attended the State Demography Summit earlier this month. The summit was a huge success, offering valuable insights from the State Demography Office, the Governor's Office, and Eagle County Public Health. This summit was particularly special as we celebrated and bid farewell to Elizabeth Garner and Cindy DeGrone, who are retiring after decades of dedicated service to Colorado. Their combined 50 years of expertise has been instrumental in shaping data-driven decision-making across our state. DOLA is very excited to welcome Kate Watkins as the new state demographer. Kate, who will enter the role full-time on December 2nd, comes to DOLA with nearly 2 decades of experience in applied economic and socioeconomic analysis. She will be replacing Elizabeth Garner, who is retiring from her state demographer position on November 29th. The State Demography Office's vintage 2023 population estimates and forecasts are now available on the SDO website. News from our Division of Housing. Division of Housing's State Housing Board has awarded $6.85 million to create or preserve 185 rental units, all aimed at providing a home for every Colorado budget. Beginning in December, Division of Housing will offer $9.5 million in federal home and HTF funds to support both rental and home ownership projects. Additionally, $10 million from Proposition 123 will be allocated specifically for home ownership projects. Division of Housing is also implementing the new scoring process in December, designed to ensure all applications align with DOH's funding priorities and are creating more housing now. This refined approach will help us evaluate projects more effectively and ensure the best outcomes. News from the Division of Local Government. Land use implementation. The Community Development Office has just released new draft tools to support implementation of House Bill 1313, transit-oriented communities, the draft Transit Center Calculation Model and Guide, and the draft Housing Opportunity Goal Calculation Tool and Guide are available for public comment until December 16th. The next land use implementation engagement meeting is this Friday, November 22nd at 10:30 a.m. The Community Development Office is hiring additional staff to support land use legislation implementation. The Housing Planning Grant Program Assistant position is open until November 22nd, and 2 other planning positions are closing at the end of the day today. Interested candidates can get their applications in by visiting the DOLA Careers webpage. The Community Development Office has released an updated template land development code, formerly known as the Model Land Use Code, to ensure local governments and consultants can access a modernized code that is representative of current best practices. There are now 4 versions of the code, which include 2 standard versions for counties and municipalities, and by request, 2 streamlined versions that are easier to implement by smaller counties and municipalities, as well as a companion guidebook for further support. We'll cover more details about the updated code at the Housing Strategies Peer Exchange tomorrow at 9 a.m. The next local planning capacity grant program cycle for Prop 123 eligible communities will open in February and close on March 14th. Some funding program updates. Cycle 25-03 of the Energy and Mineral Impact Assistance Fund opened on November 1st and will close December 1st. Interested applicants must contact their regional manager prior to applying. The microgrids for community resilience funding cycle is open. Planning applications are rolling until funds are expended. Construction applications are due December 4th, 2024. Please visit the Microgrids program website for more information and webinar recording. The 2025 CDBG Public Facilities and Infrastructure Grant application opens on November 25th and closes on February 24th. Interested applicants must first coordinate with their regional manager prior to applying. The Division of Local Government just implemented a new e-filing portal to be used by all local government entities, requiring current users who have never used the DLG grants and/or formulaic portals to create new login credentials. To help users get comfortable with the new system, a webinar recording and user guides are available on the account login page. Please contact Joe McConnell if you need assistance with the new platform. In other news, the Colorado Energy Board, ECB, a joint initiative between the Colorado Energy Office and DOLA, is working to fill 5 vacancies on the 21-seat board to serve for the remainder of the development of the state's Model Low Energy and Carbon Code, which is expected to run through June 25th. You can learn more about this announcement on the DLG website. Speaking of energy codes, we have a brief update from Shannon Bauman of the Colorado Energy Office, introducing the new cycle of the Energy Adoption and Enforcement Grant. Shannon, are you there?
I am.
Great.
Okay.
Go ahead, take it away.
Thank you so much, Eric. I'm going to just share a few quick slides here. My whole presentation was based off of 99 Love Balloons, so I had to change it really fast. I just wanted to introduce our grant program. So I'm a Buildings and Climate Associate at the Colorado Energy Office, and we just opened up our grant program for another round of funding. So that is, associated with energy codes, which are essentially building codes that govern the energy efficiency of new buildings and existing retrofits on existing buildings. And in Colorado, essentially when jurisdictions update any building code, they're required to update to our minimum energy codes that are adopted in the state. Right now, that's the 2021 IECC and the Model Electric Ready and Solar Ready codes that Eric kind of alluded to. So our grant can cover several different funding areas that help with adoption of these codes, such as code analysis, outreach and engagement, compliance review, and you can set up training and workforce development for your builders and your building professionals in your jurisdictions. And local governments are eligible, as well as councils of governments and nonprofits that can kind of manage on behalf of local governments. So our next deadline is in a month, exactly a month, December 20th, and amounts kind of range, but they can go up to $250,000 if you're applying as a partnership, which is definitely something that we recommend for jurisdictions, especially that have multiple, contractors serving multiple communities at once. And we also definitely prioritize underserved communities that are disproportionately impacted that want to apply for this funding. We currently have 7 code grants supporting 16 jurisdictions. I won't read these all here, but a lot of them are concentrated in the southwest area of the state. We'd love to kind of broaden it and really reach, all corners of the state. And yeah, so I just wanted to kind of give a highlight of where we're at there. And then I'll put this in the chat, but we have our grants webpage. There's a Q&A form, and we're also doing office hours if you have questions. And then we have our Energy Codes webpage that I'll put there with some more resources for adoption as well. Please feel free to reach out, and thank you so much for letting me share this.
Of course, and thank you so much for that update. We can now dive into our local government resources webinar, which will be introduced by Shael Sabo from our Colorado Resiliency Office. Shael, take it away.
Thank you, Eric. All right. As everyone I think is familiar with this webinar portion is to provide connections to federal and state funding opportunities to solve local issues. I just wanted to provide a little bit longer of an intro today. First and foremost, I just wanted to thank you all for the opportunity to introduce this final webinar associated with this current format. So as Eric mentioned earlier, this call, which has been led by the CRO since 2020, has evolved several times and will continue into the future. But we initially started this with the COVID response back in 2020 and moved to looking at COVID recovery, and then to provide critical updates associated with both of those, and then moved on to funding navigation during this historic time of federal and state funding opportunities with the Associated Pathways webinar. And now to live on in DLG as a local government resources call. So I just wanted to say it was an honor to be able to spend this monthly call with you each month for the last 2 years. And thank you for being here for almost 5 years in total. Before I introduce today's speakers, I just wanted to make folks aware of a couple of things related to funding. First, on behalf of Alyssa Denberg from the Governor's Office of Federal Funds and Strategic Initiatives, we just wanted to let folks on this call know that due to a technical issue, the monthly IIJ office hours has a new link, and those previously registered and who continue to wish to attend those calls will need to utilize the new link, which I will pop into the chat here shortly. And then secondly, because we are discussing conservation funding, including those associated with nature-based solutions, I wanted to share with you all a great resource in case you're not already familiar. From the EPA. This is called the Climate Resilience and Adaptation Funding Toolbox, also known as CRAFT, which not only helps navigate federal funding opportunities, but includes climate risk assessment resources to better understand impacts, and also examples of opportunities such as the nature-based solutions to address those impacts. I'll drop that link in the chat. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to today's speaker, starting with Nate Pearson, who is our Assistant Director for Water Policy, who will be followed by Wendy Hawthorne, our Director of IIJA and IRA Strategic Coordination. And finally, last but not least, today's webinar will be concluded by Dallas Blaney, Energy and Climate Federal Funds Officer. So go ahead and take it away, Nate, and I will pop all those links that I promised into the chat.
Great, thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. And yeah, as introduced, Nate Pearson, Assistant Director for Water Policy at the Colorado Department of Natural Resources. And apologies for those who have seen some version of these slides before. I've definitely presented them a lot over the years, but there's a lot of funding in the water infrastructure space from the federal government. And so there's a lot to cover. Next slide, please. Great, so I'll just cover sort of the broad overview of available federal funds for water, and then resources at the state level that can assist folks with that. And then happy to answer any questions as well, assuming this is the forum for that. Next slide. And again, thank you. So I think it's worth, and again, for some, this may be self-evident, but there are many water programs that have existed for a long time out of the federal government, from the EPA, from the Bureau of Reclamation, from other programs throughout the federal government. The recent federal bills, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the IRA, added funding to some of these existing programs, but also created a bunch of new programs. And so I'll mostly be talking here about things that were funded in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, but don't want to let that detract from the broad availability of federal funding that existed before these acts. Next slide, please. And so, like I said, some of these previously existing programs, cover a really wide array of purposes, from water conservation to ag water management under the USDA and Farm Service Agency, water quality, drought response, the whole gamut. And I know that a lot of your communities have been making use of these programs for a long time and continue to. Next slide, please. And so BIL was signed into law in 2021 and actually had over $60 billion for water. The vast majority of that was on the water quality side through the state's EPA state revolving funds, which are administered by DOLA and the Department of Public Health and Environment. But the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation also received over $8 billion for water supply conservation projects and watershed health projects. And the majority of those programs funded at the Bureau of Reclamation were new programs, including in watershed health, aquatic ecosystem health, water reuse and recycling, and then on the water quality side, web service line replacement was new funding from the federal level. Next slide, please. And then it's always worth flagging just sort of the different types of federal funding. So in some cases, the federal government received funding to, spend on their own assets, and many dams, pipelines, water systems in Colorado are either owned or operated or otherwise connected with, with the federal government. And so in many cases, those investments have been made, directly by the federal agencies on their own assets. But many of these, many of the funds have made their way to local governments, water districts, irrigation companies through cooperative agreements, formula grants, or competitive grants. And that's mostly what we'll focus on here. Next slide, please. And so in the Bureau, the bipartisan infrastructure law, and again, sort of the water supply bucket of funding, the $8 billion I mentioned, is really spread out across a wide variety of programs, from water supply to drought and efficiency to watershed and aquatic ecosystem health. It's worth pointing out, as I mentioned, the BIL passed in 2021. We're closing in on, or I think we just passed 3 full years of implementation. In the majority of cases, the funds associated with these programs listed on this slide here are available for 5 years. And so we're a little more than halfway through the Fed's implementation of this. And so it's been really exciting. We've already seen a lot of dollars hit the ground across Colorado, a lot of projects, already in construction or even, even nearing completion. And so just wanted to note for folks that while we're a good way through, the implementation, there is still time to get this, money to your communities. Apologies, I think I just cut out. And so want to just make sure that you all are aware that people who work in your water departments or water districts that impact your communities are likely engaged in planning for either money they've already received or going after money that's still available for 2 years. Next slide, please. The second bill I want to talk about is the Inflation Reduction Act. The funding for this is slightly less widespread, slightly fewer, distinct programs invested in. But over $4 billion was included in the Inflation Reduction Act for Western water issues. And this includes, a relatively small amount for drought relief for tribes, canal improvement projects, domestic water supply improvements, which actually the Ute Mountain Ute tribe just received a pretty large award from recently. And then the big ticket item here is $4 billion for drought mitigation in the Colorado River Basin and other basins experiencing similar drought conditions. This funding, if you go to the next slide, I'll talk just a little bit more about. So I'll talk here about the drought mitigation funds. As I said, $4 billion to the Inflation Reduction Act, or from the Inflation Reduction Act. And this is really for, compensation for reductions in consumptive use and ecosystem and habitat restoration projects that address issues caused by drought. The deadline, or sorry, let me back up. Of this $4 billion, the majority was allocated to the lower basin states of California, Arizona, and Nevada. but $500 million was carved out for the 4 upper Colorado River Basin states of Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. And so of that $500 billion, relatively little has made it to the ground yet. But there's a large grant opportunity currently underway, which actually expires on Friday, the 22nd, that will fund sort of environmental, ecosystem and habitat restoration projects. And we expect a lot of that money to be obligated in that award once the Bureau has reviewed them and makes awards. And so again, many communities in Colorado are going after this. Some of the large water conservation districts have consolidated or sort of taken on the fiscal agent role and are applying on behalf of organizations within their boundaries. We at the state have written a whole bunch of letters of support for applications in Colorado. And so while there's been a lot of speculation in the public and in the press about whether or not this funding will actually sort of get out the door before the next administration may or may not pull those funds back, all we can do is put forward the best applications that Colorado can put together and hope that this funding does come down and can benefit our communities and watersheds. And so we're super excited to see that money hit the ground and are hopeful that it will. Next slide, please. So this slide is basically what I just covered, just showing the breakdown of funding. Next slide, please. And then I mentioned resources. So I wanted to note, and others at DOLA and the governor's office are maybe better to talk about these matching fund opportunities than I am. But I just want to note at the bottom here that many existing state grant programs, like those from the Colorado Water Conservation Board, are able to help match or be braided with federal funding. And so in addition to some recent bills that passed, setting money aside explicitly for matching for, bipartisan infrastructure law funding, many of the existing state grant programs that your communities may have taken advantage of in the past are available to help match these funds. Next slide. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I know these slides will get shared around, and otherwise, thanks for letting me talk about water infrastructure funding for a little bit, and appreciate the audience.
Thank you, Nate. I think we'll pass it on to Wendy. And as a reminder for folks, you can drop your questions into the chat or into the Q&A, and we will get to those afterwards. And Nate, if you have to hop off a little bit early, we can follow up with you with any questions folks have.
Great, thanks, Shell. I'll take a little bit of a step backwards as a sort of a broader overview of the funding that we've already seen received in the state from IIJA or BIL, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and IRA. Next slide. Just a quick overview of the two acronyms. IIJA, also known as BIL, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, was $1.7 trillion over 5 years, and we're currently in the first quarter of the 4th year. So we should see 1 to 2 more cycles of IIJA funding. We have a better handle on it now since we've seen 3 years of it. I will say, though, that some programs are combining their final years into one funding opportunity. I think some of the federal agencies have been doing that to try to get the money out the door quicker. IRA was $370 billion over 10 years. Most of IRA was in production credits and tax credits and access to capital for clean energy projects, but there were a number of grant opportunities available, a lot in this space of wildlife and clean water. Most of those opportunities have already been awarded or announced. There might be a few more cycles of some IRA funding. Next slide. And just to talk a little bit more about what our governor's office has and DOLA has available, we have regional grant navigators around the state. So if you have an idea of a project you want to get accomplished and you want help finding the right federal funds for it, you can reach out to your regional grant navigator. We have the local matching funds that Nate mentioned. Those can only be used for IIJA or bipartisan infrastructure law projects, and there's an application process you can find on DOLA's website. We can provide grant writing assistance and project planning, and that can be the grant writing, just be fully assisted grant writing by a consultant. Also an application process you can find on DOLA's website. We have a bi-weekly newsletter, and Nate already talked about the technical assistance that Department of Natural Resources have. And all these different resources can be found on this Colorado Forward website that's linked below in this slide. Next slide. So this is an overview of what has happened so far. The state has received, like within the state, so that includes state itself, state agencies, local governments, tribes, private entities, as well as direct federal spending, where the federal agency is spending money on, for example, federal lands or federal facilities. There's been over $8 billion awarded in the state, $7 billion from infrastructure law, and almost $900 million from IRA. And of that big pool, about $361 million has been awarded for land, water, and wildlife projects. Next slide. This is how it breaks down what those land, water, and wildlife projects are. So about $112 million for wildfire prevention, $102 million for ecosystem restoration, $86 million for legacy pollution cleanup. That's like Superfund and brownfields. $29 million for community trees, $22 million for wildlife crossings, and $9.6 million for agricultural programs to conserve land and preserve for wildlife and wetlands and things like that. Next slide. These are some of the bigger opportunities that are available now or opening up soon. Protect is essentially to make surface transportation resilient to natural hazards like flooding and extreme weather events, but they do prioritize nature-based solutions. So that could include, say, improving river flow or removing culverts, things like that, that would protect the bridge or the road above it. So we have seen some good projects in Colorado that are kind of a combination of ecosystem restoration and protection of transportation projects. BRIC, which Dallas is going to talk about next, so I'll just skip that. Water Smart, aquatic ecosystem restoration and protection projects. Those can be for large-scale aquatic ecosystem restoration projects. And we've seen some really great awards in Colorado under that program. Community wildfire defense should be opening soon. The Colorado State Forest Service is providing great technical assistance and coordination for that grant. And we saw around $29 million awarded in the state in the last round. So we're hoping again to have some really great awards there. Fish Passage, which allows to remove physical barriers such as dams and culverts, will be released probably next fall, and that will be the final round of Fish Passage. And then Upper Colorado River Basin, Nate just talked about. Next slide. Here's some links to sources of information. So the DOI project dashboard, you can click on that and see all the different projects that have been awarded, and some of them maybe even completed already throughout the country, and you can zoom into Colorado. And then similarly, the Fish Passage dashboard, it's hard to say, has similarly shows those types of projects. And then the overall IIJ dashboard shows all the, not all, but most of the IIJ projects around the country. So it's interesting to zoom into Colorado, and you can click on the dots on the map and see what kinds of projects are actually being done. Next slide. And just go to the next slide too. This is an appendix. I'm not going to go through all these, but just to let you know, it's here in this deck. If you want to look at what those actual projects are and the buckets that I talked about. So, you know, 102 million ecosystem restoration, you can see what actual projects are being accomplished and who the awardee is. And you can just kind of roll through those just to see kind of what types of projects have been happening and what might be happening in near your community or in your community. So that's it for me. I'm happy. I'll be on call, obviously, to answer questions about any of these projects as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Wendy. Go ahead and take it away, Dallas.
Okay. Hi, everyone. And really, thanks to DOLA for the opportunity to be here today. And thanks for everybody who joined. It's really wonderful to be here and share some exciting news about this great opportunity called Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities. So this is me. I'm Dallas Blaney. I'm the Energy and Climate Federal Funds Officer. I work very closely with Wendy and Nate and the rest of the crew to help folks all across the state draw down federal funding to advance their energy and climate goals. So next slide. And so here's what I'm going to cover today in the presentation. I'm going to zoom in on a specific opportunity, which is BRIC, the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities grant. So we're going to talk a little bit about BRIC, who might be eligible, share a couple case studies, and then tell you how the state's going to help you win this money, and then share a couple next steps. Next slide. Okay, so really BRIC is about building resilience to natural disasters. And our ability to predict natural disasters is a little bit like our ability to predict the weather. It improves as we zoom out over months to years to decades. So if we look at natural disasters and really what's going on there, going back to the beginning of the century, the occurrence of natural disasters in Colorado has increased dramatically by 275%, in fact. So we're facing a much greater risk today. And the forecast is that things are going to deteriorate. It's going to become more challenging to deal with natural disasters as we go forward. Part of that's due to climate change. Part of it's due to human impact on the environment, a whole range of challenges there. But really the primary culprits when it comes to natural disasters are wildfires and floods, as I'm sure all of you are aware, and droughts as well in Colorado. And the expectation is that the cost of this damage is going to increase over time. So one estimate out of the Resiliency Office is that by 2050, we can expect to pay at least $440 million annually just to deal with the damage and challenge of dealing with wildfires specifically. But as I'm sure some of you are aware, we've already eclipsed that figure for some years. For example, there are some estimates that the Marshall wildfire cost over $500 million. So this is a very costly challenge, both in terms of our pocketbook, but also in terms of human health, in terms of environmental sustainability, et cetera, et cetera. And so that brings us to, next slide, BRIC. And the idea behind BRIC is to get ahead of all of this, to help local communities build the capacity they need to enhance their resilience to these sorts of challenges into the future. So it's a really wonderful funding opportunity that I think many of us really appreciate, the opportunity to avoid these kinds of things rather than just trying to clean up after the fact. The funding for this opportunity, this all gets managed through FEMA. This is an IIJA funding opportunity. We're expecting the rollout for 2024 has not yet happened. We're expecting the NOFO to drop in December, but we're expecting the national opportunity to be in the order of $1 billion nationwide for this competitive grant opportunity. The average funding for this per project is between $1 and $2 million, although there are awards in the high six-figure range and up to $50 million. So there are several examples of very high dollar projects that have been funded by FEMA. Now these projects, the project types can include capacity building, although most go toward actual mitigation projects. So, and I'll give you a couple examples of those going forward. The match for this, for most cases, is 25%. Although if you're a small and impoverished community, the match could be as little as 10%, which is wonderful. Some of that match can be covered through in-kind sources, or you could just pay the match in cash. FEMA, though, does allow you to include 100% of the management costs for your project in your award. So that's another feature as well. And if for select cases, you can also include the pre-award costs. For example, for your benefit cost analysis, those kinds of things. So this is a really wonderful funding opportunity, particularly for small and impoverished communities. The period of performance on this is 3 years. So you have 36 months to get the job done once the project is awarded. Next slide. So who is eligible? The primary applicant for BRIC is the state. So in the state, it's the Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, or DHSEM. And then there are sub-applicants who can apply through the state's application. And those sub-applicants are local governments, tribal governments, and state, local, and tribal agencies. Nonprofits can also get involved in the game as well, but they have to work with one of these 3 sub-applicant entities to participate in the application. Yeah, and also one other thing I should note about eligibility is that to be eligible for this opportunity, you have to have in place a FEMA-approved hazardous mitigation plan. If you're a small community and you don't have one of those, it may be possible to apply under the umbrella, for example, of your county, if they have a FEMA-approved hazardous mitigation plan and they're willing to serve as the financial fiduciary agent for this grant. So that could be a workaround if you're a really small community, as some are. Next slide. So here's a case study, and the case studies I'm going to pull from are from out of state. Unfortunately, we haven't received too many awards, which is one of the reasons why we're promoting this particular opportunity. We feel like there's a really good opportunity here for Colorado to improve its performance over this next round, or maybe the round after this, to bring more of these dollars into the state and do some good work. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples from out of state. This first one comes from Gastonia, North Carolina. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. They were awarded $6 million for this opportunity to do some floodplain work. They have a significant risk of flooding in their community, in part because of the increased frequency and intensity of rainfall in their community, but also because of human impact, because of non-porous services and that kind of thing, exacerbating the impact of the rainfall. So through their award, they were able to do some floodplain benching to mitigate the flooding in their community. They were able to regrade their riverbank. They were able to plant native riparian vegetation that was better able to withstand and absorb the rainfall. And they were able to relocate sewer and power lines. One thing to note as part of this opportunity as well is that every application is strongly encouraged and actually strengthens your application if you include a nature-based solution as part of your approach. And so I'll give you an even better example of that in the next slide. Next slide. So here's another example. This is of wildfire mitigation in Nevada County, which is where Truckee is in California and near Lake Tahoe, all that stuff. They certainly have a severe risk of wildfire in their community. Several instances of wildfire in recent years, including one that I want to say it was 2021 that burned down something like 2,600 acres in their county. So severe risk there. So they were successful in securing a very large grant of $31 million for a fire mitigation project that included home hardening retrofits for 1,200 homes in their community. They enhanced the defensible spaces around these homes and around their community to make them more resilient to wildfire. They promoted community education around wildfire, and they adopted this nature-based approach, which included livestock grazing as part of their effort. So just to give you some examples of how different communities are approaching this and the kinds of strategies that they're applying. I've seen other examples where, for flooding, where communities will actually apply to remove whole buildings out of a floodplain to mitigate risk. In other cases where they'll move infrastructure, as they did in the last example, whether it be sewer and water treatment power plants, those kinds of things, to move those things out of harm's way. So you can do, moving bridges, all those roadways, all those kinds of things can be incorporated into the grant application, depending on your need and the risks that you're facing. Next slide. So how can the state help you win? So we have a range of technical assistance. So a lot of that comes from DHSEM directly. These are the real experts in our state around natural disaster. So certainly you can get support through FEMA Go and login.gov. You can go to DHSEM and they have office hours around this BRIC opportunity. You can talk with the DHSEM experts about this, and they can help answer your questions about how best to structure your application and give you feedback. And then in addition, you've already heard about the support that we offer through the governor's office around grant writing and matching funds as well. And the matching fund opportunity does apply to this because it's an IIJA funding source. Next slide. So next steps, definitely, check this out. Here's a QR code. If you've got a phone handy, you can point it at this or just catch the URL here and go to this website and learn more about the application process. The initial notice of interest with DHSEM is very easy to complete, doesn't require a lot of work just to get the process rolling. They have not yet released, as I mentioned earlier, the NOFO for this. We expect that to come out in December. So there's still some time to get moving on this, but the sooner you act, the better, especially with the holidays coming up. It's also important to make sure you have a registration with sam.gov and grants.gov to move forward with this. And if you have specific questions about this opportunity, the real expert on this is Emily. I've included her email address here, so definitely drop her a line. She'd be happy to work with you and answer your questions about this opportunity, as would I. But she definitely knows more than I do. She works on this day in and day out. So next slide. And this is my contact information. If you have any questions or want to follow up with me about this opportunity, I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you again to Nate, Wendy, and Dallas for these excellent presentations. We do have a couple of questions starting to come in. So the first question is for you, Dallas. Do you have a definition of, quote, small and impoverished? Hard to say.
Yeah, so the way that's a great question. The way this opportunity describes it is that it falls under the definition of a community disaster resilience zone. And so what they're looking for here is a community with 3,000 or fewer people, where 80% or greater of that population, or where that population falls under 80% of the national per capita income. So that's how they define it. So that's really the qualification there to unlock that 10% matching funds opportunity.
Great, thank you. And then, follow up to that, does anyone have a recommendation on how we find out if the state is applying, and if so, what they are applying for?
Is that specific to BRIC?
I believe so. This came in during the BRIC question, or the BRIC presentation.
Yeah, so the state doesn't really aggregate and apply. The way it works is you kind of apply under the umbrella of the state as your local community. Now, different states manage this differently. In our state, the way DHSEM manages it is that they don't discourage any applications from moving forward, but they do try to work with you to strengthen your application to make it as competitive as possible.
Great. And then, would extreme heat mitigation be considered for BRIC?
You know what? It could be under, I think that would probably fall under drought. So it could potentially be considered. There's certainly a long history of funding in BRIC for drought. So I think that's probably the best way to frame it. Certainly working with DHSEM to make sure you've got that framing correct. The one thing I can pass along is that we've heard from FEMA that they're really emphasizing flood risks and wildfire risks for this next round. So if you really want to maximize your potential, what we're hearing from FEMA is that's the best way to frame your award or your application for this specific round.
Great, and then I'll move into the questions in the Q&A box here. Rebecca asks, I have a question about local government matches. With recent legislative changes that curb property tax revenues, many Colorado counties need to tighten or reduce budgets, which significantly limits our ability to produce matching funds for larger projects. It sounds like there's a local match grant program for federal grants, but not necessarily state grants. Could the state consider a lower match requirement specifically for counties? So I don't know if you want to speak to that one for BRIC, Dallas, or I
That
think
would be
Snow is
more of a
also on the
Wendy
call too.
question, if Wendy's still on the call.
Yeah, all I can speak to is the matching funds, the IIJA cash fund matching funds, which is in legislation that it can only be used for the federal IIJA funding application. So unless there's a legislative change that, we can't shift that for state funds.
Great, thank you. All right, couple more BRIC questions here. Alamosa County submitted a BRIC app earlier this year. Do you know when award announcements will go out for that last cycle?
I believe the award announcements did go out for the last cycle. So I think those, if they haven't received, I apologize if they haven't received an award. I'll look into that and follow up with them one way or the other and let them know.
Yeah, and I believe that was under the codes bucket of BRIC, Dallas, so it might be different.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thanks, Wendy.
Okay, and then this one's a little bit more specific too. Is replacement of existing asbestos concrete water distribution available for funding?
Is that specifically for BRIC or just sort of a general question?
Alex, can you clarify if this was for BRIC or if it was for, maybe this might have been a question for Nate earlier too? I don't know if Alex, looks like Alex is still on the call. While we're waiting for Alex to respond, Alamosa County said as of last week, Richard Hubler at Alamosa County had not heard of the status. So just following up on that.
Okay.
I'm just regarding the asbestos question. I think I'm not sure that doesn't sound like it would be covered with BRIC unless it was also like related to moving those facilities out of a flood zone, maybe like Dallas's first example. And then if there were extra costs related to the fact that those were asbestos, maybe those could be wrapped into it. But I guess if that's a priority project for you, I would suggest maybe reaching out to your regional grant navigator to see they can maybe help determine if there are other sources of funding that could address that issue.
Great, thank you. Oh, Alex says we are an older community when those materials were acceptable. Yeah, we can follow up with Nate on that question too, because it doesn't sound like it's necessarily out of the floodplain or anything, but more so speaking to materials themselves.
Mm-hmm.
All right, just double checking the chat here. I'm not seeing any more questions. Oh, one more just came in. Can BRIC grants be considered for river recreation projects if river bank stability and native vegetation plantings are part of the project?
You know, it's not outside the realm of possibility. I think the real key here is that you have to really take great care to show that you're responding to a real risk of natural disaster, and that your strategy and the benefit cost analysis that would go into applying for a BRIC grant shows that this is a cost-effective solution to that particular risk. So if your recreation strategy, I don't know what it could be, maybe a whitewater park or something as part of your, you're doing a laddering project and you want to build a whitewater park as part of that. And if you do, let me know. I'm a kayaker. I'd love to check it out. But yeah, I think it may be possible, but I think you're going to have to tie it to a real natural disaster risk that you're trying to mitigate, and that your solution has to be cost effective.
Great. And I think this one's more for Wendy. Are you aware of any grant funding programs for community pool reconstruction or rehabilitation for a metro city area, or a metro area city, excuse me?
I am not, and there are not many opportunities in IIJA that are like specific to a type of building or a facility. They're more, except for I'd say, water treatment facilities, clean water, drinking water facilities, roads, bridges, things like that. So we have had a lot of requests, for things like improving city halls or recreation centers, and there just really is not much in the infrastructure law to cover those things.
All right, I think that is all of the questions that I'm seeing. As always, we will be sending this out in a follow-up email, the recording of this call, the Q&A log, as well as notes and links from today. I know we had quite a few in here today, so don't feel like you have to try to capture those all now. And then as a reminder, we will not have a call in December, and this will be transitioning over to Division of Local Government, spearheading this moving forward starting in January. So with that, I think I can turn it back over to you, Eric.
Thank you, Shale. Again, I do want to thank all of our speakers. I want to thank everybody for joining us today on the call. Again, we will be following this up with a meeting recording, as Shale said, and a list of all the Q&A and the notes, all the links. We really appreciate you all joining us. I wish you all a very happy and safe Thanksgiving next week, and we will see you all in the new year. Take care.